The President of the United States once asked me a question during one of these key meetings at the White House, and he asked me, why is AI important? Why should we be
Mm-hmm.
investing more in AI? I'm in a room filled with very important people, and so I had to think very quickly on my feet, but it was a very natural and a very simple answer. And the answer was that the reason, and in particularly for me in healthcare, why you invest in AI and
Mm-hmm.
modernization, is because it's the difference in saving lives. For example, you could have a scenario where you're in an emergency room situation and you could be relying on artificial intelligence to help make a recommendation for someone who is experiencing a medical situation, and that recommendation could be the difference between saving that person's life, because the answer to the question can be answered in seconds or minutes, where in the past it could have taken much longer, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
either the wrong decision or no decision or recommendation was made.
Hello, this is your host Camilo Sandoval, and together with my guests, we discuss how tech is changing the way we live and work. Are you ready?
Camila, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love your name, by the way.
It's almost like your name, but with a C.
It means perfect. Did you
Well,
know?
I didn't know that. I'll have to add that to my LinkedIn profile.
Actually, it goes without saying. After I've seen your LinkedIn profile and the number of roles and the types of roles you held over the years, it's it's an honor. It's an honor to speak with you, and I'm really curious about your experience you've held. From what I see, you've been working in the United States Air Force and the National Security Agency as an intelligence analyst while living in Japan for 5 years. And then you moved back to US, and you wanted to become an investment banker on Wall Street. And then you moved back to government, and you became chief information officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and then the CSI, wait, chief information security officer at the United States at the White House, and some more. It's just too many things to note. I know that you are also advisor to many startups in the US, based in the US and Japan. What made you move away from corporate and the government and switch tables to helping startups?
Well, thank you for that question, and don't let the long titles, um, impress you, because the government has a tendency of making little small things into really big things, and so the titles are always very
Mm.
long. In all earnest, I think it began with just a tremendous amount of curiosity and thirst for knowledge that I developed at a very young age. And I was always very interested in the intersection, of technology, policy, healthcare, and national security, and would find myself, reading and following things at a very early age, trying to understand, trying to make sense of those things. That led me to serve in the United States Air Force, where in earnest I began that long journey to Japan. And I served in the United States Air Force, but also, as you mentioned, in the National Security Agency. And my tenure in the military took me to Japan in 1993, where I worked as a signals intelligence analyst. Listening to some very interesting signals coming out of the Far East, and I specialized
Mm.
especially on signals that were transmitted from satellite systems to short duration signals, and including Morse code. And that led me to then specializing in cryptology and understanding Russian Cyrillic characters. At the time, we didn't call it cybersecurity or big data or artificial intelligence, but essentially we were at the cutting edge, at the forefront of what we now know as such technologies. And that experience then led me to I want to explore other types of problems. I was always very fascinated and interested in solving math problems. And so the kind of problems that I gravitated towards, I wanted to find a way of solving that algebraically. And so I felt that after my career in the military, that I wanted to explore a career in Wall Street. So after receiving my MBA, I landed in Wall Street and then pursued a career in healthcare investment banking and another technology-driven firms, which brought me full circle, back to Japan earlier this summer. And so I kind of found this opportunity, if you will, of culminating all those experiences in technology and national security in Wall Street, and exploring possibilities to bring that experience and invest in opportunities that looked exciting to me in Japan. And that's how I spent the entire summer in Japan, looking and exploring and meeting a lot of entrepreneurs.
And yeah, I guess it puts you in a perfect position because you see things which US is in a way leading, right? And then in Japan it's just like it's starting to become a thing to a certain extent. I guess it's also because of their aversion to risk. What would you say? Or there are some other
So,
factors?
yeah, there are definitely a lot of factors, but I think first I've had the tremendous privilege to witness firsthand the rapid evolution of technology and its implications, both from a domestic, from a national security, and also from a commercial point of view, and the implications in the global stage. With Japan tech market, Japan is very well known for its hardware innovation and its amazing technology in robotics or even automobile. But it's lesser known, perhaps, for its innovation in AI or cybersecurity or software engineering. And so this is both an opportunity and a challenge for Japan. And I think my experiences, especially during my time based in Japan, for me, it was a natural pivot to turn my attention to this market. But moreover, I think we are living in a more interconnected world. And so looking at these challenges, a belief that Japan is further ahead or more advanced in certain areas. And it's actually 5 to 10 years behind, for example, in healthcare, technology, for example, with their electronic medical records or cybersecurity.
And would you say the AI, biggest trends right now, the emerging tech, is an opportunity for them to maybe catch up with some areas?
Absolutely, and that was what. So what brought me to Japan this summer originally started with the G7 summit at Hiroshima, and I met with many leaders, associations, and other entrepreneurs to talk about what is Japan's future and future role and responsibilities in the world of data privacy, AI, as they are beginning to develop their framework and their policies that will guide their society, their entrepreneurs, their CEOs on what is socially acceptable in Japan. But like I mentioned, there are many holes and opportunities, and I found that my experience was very much valued to bring perspective to not necessarily thinking about how to develop better algorithms, but it was actually more about opportunities of how to bring developing technologies to the United States and what that
Mm-hmm.
takes. One of the things that I was very impressed and also surprised was the desire by these entrepreneurs to want to be in
Mm-hmm.
America, to take their technology, improve their technology in America. And I met with entrepreneurs from the top startups in Japan to day zero startups. And the common denominator was this desire to prove their abilities and their products in the U.S. market, which I was pleasantly surprised and found myself wanting to help in many cases.
Mm-hmm. So these are the startups which have already achieved some sort of success on the local market, or is it?
Yeah, not necessarily. Some have.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the startups that I'm currently advising, for example, I'll take one, Yap. Yap is a day zero startup that was funded
Mm-hmm.
by Antler. And I jumped in because I was very excited on the problem that they're trying to solve. And that is a supply chain problem with respect to generic pharmaceuticals in Japan. Japan's population is getting older and living longer, but that presents a very unique problem as Japan is a one payer system. And what YAP
And what does it mean?
so
What does it?
basically, the insurance coverage
Mm-hmm.
that Japan receives, the population basically is funded mostly by the Japanese government.
Mm-hmm.
And so that creates a tremendous financial burden for a population that's growing much older. It's
Mm-hmm.
increasing in size because they're living longer. And to compound the problem, you have the population shrinking, which decreases revenues for the government to rely on to pay for those older and sicker patients. So YAP is on a mission to help support Japan in changing how they interact with generic pharmaceuticals. And so they're focusing in on looking at DXP, which is the digital experience platform. And these are three professionals that had very successful careers in commercial Japan, and they saw the opportunity. And this is what I found very unusual, but also inspiring, is that they they changed their trajectory from being corporate officers and career minded salarymen to being
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs and taking these ideas that they have to make the to solve the problem of generic pharmaceuticals and the healthcare cost in Japan by developing solutions that are technology driven, that are digital in nature. These are use cases that have been looked at and solved in the US many,
Mm-hmm.
many years ago, but Japan is very unique in that it's still a very paper driven, very process oriented, and also stamp driven culture. So I found
Mm-hmm.
many of these startups like Yap, but I particularly was fascinated with Yap because of my background, where they're going, and the opportunity to help them make a difference in the market and also help Japan solve this problem.
Maybe it's, like you said, it's changing, but it's incredible to see salarymen trying to break break free from what used to be the lifestyle, right? Like when you were joining the company, the corporation, you were becoming their, like they were owning you, right? And now um more and more people, and I know because I told you earlier, we were also participating as our startup with 500 global of international startups, expanding to Japan, and they were telling us in larger cities like in Osaka or Tokyo, there are more and more salarymen who are trying to pursue career of entrepreneurship, which is amazing.
It really is. And, there are definitely still a lot of growing pains. And,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, as an investor, that hasn't changed in terms of our perspective, or at least my perspective, and that is that you're still looking for a return on investment. And I think to add to that is Japan traditionally operates through examples. It's a different culture compared to the U.S., where it is almost celebrated or encouraged that it's okay to build a plane while still in flight. In Japan, there's a different risk tolerance to that idea. And so they prefer to have clear and vivid examples before they make a decision. And even then, they're going to have many meetings about the decisions that are pending to be made. And so having an appreciation for the Japanese way of doing things is tremendously important if you're going to be successful in that environment, especially as an investor, because you can find yourself being in a very uncomfortable environment, and it could be very frustrating. And I think I rely upon those 30 years of history that I have had in Japan to guide me and understand and appreciate as well that with that frustration, that there's also a ton of knowledge and opportunity to learn from the way that they do things. And it's a mutually beneficial kind of relationship. I learned from them, but they also learn from how in the U.S., we tend to look at these problems differently. But the use cases are definitely very clear. And so that's what I find interesting, is that they're exportable use cases. These are use cases that if you can solve the problem in one country, you can also solve that problem most likely in another country. And that's a fascinating kind of, that's a really interesting place to be in as you start, I start looking more at the global markets.
Yeah, and I guess it's also very, like you said, it's a country full of opportunities, because even international startups stay away from Japan because they don't understand their culture, right? That there's tremendous need for innovation like AI, and sometimes like you are still wondering how come some things are still run on paper.
Yeah, and that, but I would say that's true, but I would also add that that's changing. I was very pleasantly surprised. Like, I spent a lot of time meeting entrepreneurs, meeting corporate conglomerates and chief information officers, and learning about how Japan is shifting that perception. Part of it was the challenges with the visa programs in Japan. And Japan has made some tremendous headway and policy changes in allowing entrepreneurs to explore opportunities in Japan with innovative new visas that allow entrepreneurs to enter the country in a more friendly and supportive environment. But it's also out of necessity, because you have this decreasing population, and Japan has communities that are being decimated because they're shrinking communities that no one wants to stay in these communities, because they want to live in the cities. They want to live where the jobs are. They don't want to take over the mom and pop shops that their grandparents or their parents had. So it is a double-edged it is like a double-edged thorn. And so they're relying on foreigners to come in, my understanding, to help augment some of that. But there's also an appetite to bring more skilled workforce into Japan. And it's something that I want to help advance as well, particularly in the cybersecurity space.
And how do you do that?
Well, I don't want to give away too many of my secrets, but one of the things that I explored and had many conversations with university professors, with government officials, with accelerators and incubators, is the idea of helping through education and partnership and building potentially twin city or sister city strategies that can help Japan to solve some of these challenges. And I believe it begins with education. And for example, some of the conversations that I was having during the G7 summit evolved around national security and the idea that Japan oftentimes has to rely on its allies or other countries to support its national security posture and apparatus. Um, and they could find themselves in a very uncomfortable position if you're experiencing, imagine you're the leader of a superpower and you have to rely on other countries to learn more about your cybersecurity posture or defense mechanisms. And I think those opportunities to solve that needs to begin with reskilling the workforce. That doesn't happen overnight. I think that happens through partnership. And I believe that, through my network and my knowledge and just my relationship, my 30-year relationship with Japan, that I find that is a very passionate problem that I think I can help solve. And it's going to take a community. It's not just me. Helping Japan reskill and retrain and build more of that cybersecurity awareness with AI in mind.
It's really interesting because at the same time, as you said, the population is decreasing, but there is a more need to tackle some challenges, external, internal, and then become more efficient with what you have. From what I read about Japan, is one of the oldest in the world as a population, but it's estimated by 2040, Japan is expected to have people aged over 65, and it will be 1/3 of the whole population. Right now, it's already 1 in 10 Japanese people is over 80 years old. I guess it's a big opportunity for you because you have experience in healthcare. So healthcare and AI, and combining this, there's just so many use cases, so many areas where you can bring value.
That's right. Absolutely. And that was how I spent a lot of my time, was understanding, exactly what those use cases would look like. And particularly, I'm very interested in healthcare in Japan. There are a lot of similarities in the challenges that Japan is facing and the type of challenges that I saw at the Department of Veteran Affairs, where I had a tremendous opportunity to look at our national healthcare system, both from a public standpoint and a private standpoint. More specifically, these opportunities could be in something like home care, where it tends to be a very difficult environment today to find the skilled labor workforce, because it is kind of like a revolving door. And when you have a shrinking population like Japan has, and you have an increasing aging population, it becomes very difficult for Japan to service the needs of those that are sick at home that need just simple home care. It's not even looking at nursing care. And when I start diving into those use cases, I find a lot of similarities, disparate systems, fragmented workforce, tremendous opportunity to leverage, SaaS platforms, bring integrated solutions into the marketplace, both in Japan, but also in the United States. And I apologize, there's some sirens. I live in New York City where there are always lots of sirens, but I promise they're not coming for me. But
that's what I was suggesting.
Actually, in just a moment. But yeah, just to finish my thought, yes, healthcare is a tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurs and even just organizations that want to invest in Japan and bring their innovative solutions. And so again, I find myself in a very pivotal position to help advocate both ways, both importing and exporting not just solutions, but ideas and conversations. And I'm finding myself engaging more and more in those types of conversations and also looking for investment opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So let's focus now on the American side. When you were serving as a CIO for the Department of Veterans Affairs, what were the biggest challenges you faced, and what kind of I know lots of them, but what kind of technology, emerging technology, you had a chance to use and implement, or it was still very much traditional?
So it was an honor to serve. And it was, as a veteran myself, it was a privilege to serve other veterans. And you never, one of the things that I tell, that I share with people that ask me about my experience, and it was my second opportunity to serve this country. And as a political appointee, you take that responsibility very seriously, and you transcend political and you focus on the mission. And the mission of the VA is very humbling. It's based on serving veterans who have tremendous needs, and everything from trying to prevent veteran suicide to homelessness. And you realize that the decisions that you're making doesn't impact, decisions I'm making today may impact a founder or an investor, but the decisions I was making at that level, at that scale, are impacting millions and millions of people and their families. So you take those responsibilities very seriously. And many of the challenges that I saw at the VA were also challenges that you experience in the commercial sector, like ideas such as interoperability of healthcare data, which is a tremendous challenge and a tremendous opportunity. And in no scenario should our healthcare, our medical records be held hostage to the inefficiencies of technology. At the same time, we made a lot of headway in trying to solve those problems and those use cases through modernization of systems, and working with like the Department of Energy and the supercomputer capabilities at Oak Ridge, leveraging Frontier to solve, problems like inefficiencies in healthcare records. The President of the United States once asked me a question during one of these key meetings at the White House, and he asked me, why is AI important? Why should we be investing more in AI? I'm in a room filled with very important people, and so I had to think very quickly on my feet, but it was a very natural and a very simple answer. And the answer was that the reason, and particularly for me in healthcare, why you invest in AI and modernization, is because it's the difference in saving lives. For example, you could have a scenario where you're in an emergency room situation and you could be relying on artificial intelligence to help make a recommendation for someone who is experiencing a medical situation, and that recommendation could be the difference between saving that person's life, because the answer to the question can be answered in seconds or minutes, where in the past it could have taken much longer, and therefore either the wrong decision or no decision or recommendation was made. And you learn very quickly that in Washington, you don't sell the technology. What you sell is the solution in terms of how does it make a difference in people's lives. And ultimately, that is the point, I think, of government, is to benefit society. And so it was a privilege to be able to look at those types of problems at the VA as the CIO. To be able to not only tell those stories, but also to make decisions around the type of investments that we were making to help improve the quality of lives that veterans were living in their
Hmm.
Sirens again.
Don't worry about that.
I hope I
it's
answered your
it,
question.
yes,
It's a very
it's
big
and I have
requirement.
a follow-up question. Actually, the follow-up question uh, suggested by my friend who was also serving in the U.S. Army, Jonathan, and he was asking if I can ask you, what difference do you see between integration of emerging tech like AI in the government space versus commercial applications which you work around?
So, if I understand the question, I believe one example that I can provide you is during my time at the VA, I helped bring the concept of developing open APIs in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of the strong belief that even though government plays a foundational role in leading the way and encouraging both public and private investment, the government also has unique responsibilities to encourage innovation. But the government is limited sometimes in the innovation that it can produce itself. If you have the same tools and you kind of exhausted the many different ways that you can maximize or leverage those tools, you have to find ways to leverage new tools to solve old problems, if you will. And oftentimes you have to step out of Washington, D.C. to do that. So what we started was this open API program called Lighthouse. And the Lighthouse
Mm-hmm.
program was designed specifically to allow the private sector, if you will, to leverage the data sets that the VA has, tremendous data sets. Its corporate data warehouse is renowned for its longitudinal records of its veterans. We have
Mm-hmm.
the healthcare records from when you served in the military. We say from birth, from cradle to death in the VA, because
Mm-hmm.
we literally
Mm-hmm.
do have the records of service members from when they joined the military at a very early age to the day that they no longer need the VA. And so finding opportunities to encourage innovation required us to share and open certain data
Mm-hmm.
sets, but with a very specific ask. It needed to improve, customer service. And so the whole
Mm-hmm.
notion of driving more digital experience in the VA was something that was a very top priority of our time and my time there, and building those partnerships and answering the question that I think that we need to continue to look at how this public-private intersection of government and the private sector can help bring more innovation, not just innovation from the government. Lastly, I would say that the regulatory environment also is very critical, and the policies that get created.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we lean towards our legislators to try to solve some of the challenges, but there are times that the rules and the legislation become so draconian that they suppress innovation. They don't, you
Mm-hmm.
gotta, especially I believe, and I led with this in mind, is that you definitely want to protect those that could be disenfranchised by automation or AI systems, but you also need to have room to allow for exploration and innovation to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encourage legislators that even though we are trying to protect our most vulnerable in society, we also need to encourage some more risk taking, because from that we wouldn't have had the first man in the moon, or we wouldn't have had NASA wouldn't have been able to do the things that they have done in the past, and even they had to realize that they had to evolve and rely more on the private sector to continue that public-private collaboration. So that's how I think the VA brings that to the table, and that's what we tried to do during my time to help drive more public-private innovation.
Yeah, I guess it's a very delicate balance, right, between protecting privacy, protecting data, and being open and allowing for failure in a way, or experimentation.
And this brings back the notion of the differences in the culture between Japan and the U.S. I think we do have more of an acceptance towards failure, but we want to fail quickly. And I think Japan, from my experience, they have a different take. They don't necessarily embrace failure the same way, and it's more about what do you do to mitigate that failure up front. And you kind of see that with with the manuals that the Japanese are famous for producing or developing. You know, they're very thick manuals.
Yes.
They love their manuals in Japan and their documentation, and that's not to mitigate or belittle the importance of it, but failure is an important concept to innovation, and in government, you know, that also takes, you know, it tends to be a little bit more like Japan in some ways. There are political risk, if you will, that also are taken into account.
People who are ruling always look short term, protecting what they are influencing rather than what's good for long term.
Yeah, thankfully, I think at the Department of Veteran Affairs, everyone, you know, was more focused on what benefits the veterans, as it should be.
You mentioned about the aspect of education, and I couldn't agree more. It's very important also on the level of challenges and opportunities and risks. And I'm working in AI, and what I've heard, like the conversation I had the other day with one person who works in UN, it shocked me, but at the same time, it didn't. Some countries, some officials downplay the role and the threats of not really the AI per se, but of not utilizing it and letting other countries surpass you. So it will create bigger and bigger gap between different countries. And I guess my question to you: how can you encourage government officials to take a note and to be more aware what's happening and treat it more seriously?
No, that's a great question, and it is a challenge, particularly when you're working with different governments and different government agencies. Their starting points are different in terms of their knowledge and their use cases. But I think the common denominator, and you kind of touched that in your question, is that the leap to AI is not as big as what people think it is. Because people know their industry, people know their use cases, there's subject matter expertise that they can bring to the table that enhances the world of AI. It's not just necessarily focusing on the math, but I encourage, you know, those that I have similar conversations with that that leaning towards that curiosity. For example, if you look at, you know, today the trend, what are some of the prerequisites, for example, for somebody that wants to take a deep dive or specialization into deep learning? High school math background is sufficient in multiple ways. For example, there are many different roles in the world for engineering, including beyond engineering. For example, product managers, business development, legal and finance, and marketing and PR and customer service. All of them are going to require some level of expertise and knowledge that are going to be technical in nature.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of seeing that today here in the U.S. with the strike at the giant automobile manufacturers across the country and in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
the UAE or UAW, where there are concerns about we're advocating for EV electrical vehicles, but
Mm-hmm.
those vehicles require a different kind of workforce. But that
Mm-hmm.
workforce doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities there. Yeah, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of interest as well. But I think building more awareness, I think it's key for governments and for institutions. Again, this is one of the things that I saw as an overarching opportunity in Japan for me
Mm-hmm.
is that nexus between how do you build a future workforce in
Mm-hmm.
Japan or America or in Europe or anywhere else. You have to have this public-private collaboration that supports centers of excellence and institutional knowledge. Um, so we are better prepared to transition to what the commercial sector and even the government sector, the type of skills that will be required in the future. I'm less discouraged by that trend. I see more opportunities. At the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
this is just going to require just more knowledge and some more experience. But the world is not as scary as some people may make it sound to be.
Of course, don't trust media. It feeds on fear. But then at the same time, you see that tech is more accessible, right? Like
Right.
you don't really need to. Of course, it helps to understand the logic and everything, but you don't really need to code in some ways to build things. There are no code platforms. There are tools which allow you to, I don't know, like build a website, build a shop without having any knowledge, technical knowledge. So it's encouraging for people who are hoping to get an extra income, and they can do lots of things by themselves.
Yes, that is an evolving. It is more accessible, and I think that's a great thing. But we have to be more comfortable with kind of rethinking what a career might look like. Even for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Yes.
the idea after serving in government and in commercial sector for the past 30 years, after leaving the White House, I had to reevaluate how I wanted to spend the next 3, 5, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that I'm constantly looking for ways to evolve my skill sets. I'm either reading new books, I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much out there, but there is a point where you do want to specialize.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it begins with something as simple as building, having a whiteboard and writing down an equation, one
Mm-hmm.
piece at a time. And there's an art and a science to that I think helps students understand the slowness of the whiteboard and writing down those equations kind of forces you to minimalize your ideas that I think
Mm-hmm.
lead to stepping the building blocks. And so my recommendation is don't start with the most complicated problem if it discourages you from trying to solve that problem. Start with something as simple as just writing down the problems piece by piece, and then if you can develop a solution on paper, then you start figuring out how do you develop those solutions digitally, even in the low code, no code environment. Having
Mm-hmm.
those basic building blocks are going to be invaluable when you get into more advanced use cases.
And I know that you are advising and you are coaching on personal development and career progression. So, what would be your advice for people who are in very the traditional type of industries, and they understand that focusing more or like implementing some part of technical or technological tools would be beneficial for transition, but they don't know where to start.
I don't want to answer it by giving you examples of tools. I want to answer it by giving you kind of like what I learned in the commercial sector. I once had a senior executive at a very prominent, and apologies for the sirens again,
No worries.
New York City. It's a great city that never sleeps.
Yes.
But as I was saying, what I would encourage your listeners and others to think about is, yes, you can learn about more about math and about supervised or unsupervised data and training and machine learning and use cases. But I think you begin with a vision.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I remember once a senior executive that I worked with once shared with me, you have to be the CEO of your own career. And so, I internalized that. And what that meant for me was that that developing a vision is key, and having that thirst and ambition and hunger helps you to develop and make that transition. And I think for me, that was something that kind of was born with a sense of curiosity, driven by my fascination with math problems and science, but then trying to find real world application and how to solve that. At the time, I wasn't thinking about machine learning, at my earliest years, but there was just something about developing that internal passion. And so the idea of being the CEO of your own career means that you do have to take a level of ownership of where you imagine or where you vision yourself going, and then giving yourself permission to experiment and take risk. For me at the time, I was working full time, and I started a little startup that was based on near field communication. I'd never developed any mobile app before. I'd never done anything with near field communications, but I saw a trend and I wanted to prove kind of like, could I put together a team and an idea and then develop kind of like that entrepreneurial juices? I see my camera just stopped.
Mine or yours?
Both. You disappeared.
I see my. Wait. Yeah, at least I will be looking in the more closer to the camera right now. So where were we?
In the commercial sector, I always vision myself doing where I want to be before I actually head in that direction. And there's just something about the creative process and, trying to kind of reverse engineer and back into that vision. At the time when I received that advice, I had just started my first startup, and I was working full time. I wasn't ready to leave my Wall Street job, but the advice he gave me helped give me the encouragement that it was okay, and that it was okay for me to take chances, and that I didn't need to wait for the next promotion, that it wasn't going to be something that was going to be handed down to me. But given how democratized the technology is today, that there was enough tools, and I had developed enough business acumen that I could just figure it out and become an entrepreneur or a CEO of my own startup and my own vision. And I think the challenges that I see today is that I see too many in corporate America and in Japan with the salary man mindset, that the expectation is that if you work hard and you wait your turn, then eventually you will become the CEO of of your career or of that organization. And I think what we're seeing today is we're seeing that pivot, especially coming out of post pandemic, that people are leveraging the awesome power of AI and data and innovation to become the CEOs of their own careers. And those that are still hesitant or on the sidelines, start small. That's what I did. I didn't give up my day job, but
Mm-hmm.
I was pulling very long hours. But there was a burning passion that was driving that notion for me, and I think that's a good first step. Um, that's how I would approach it.
I completely agree with you. You always have to start with the vision, and then also the nice things you get, the promotions, or in a way, like when you are having your own company, and the the glory, the business deals. It's all the result of giving value, like creating the
Absolutely.
value, right? Like that. This is how
I would I would
what
even
you should focus on.
extend I would
Yeah.
even extend and share this that this is also a very helpful tactic for those that are interviewing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in,
Yes.
in careers, that I have been in interviews in the past where there was absolutely no structure or no agenda
Mm-hmm.
to the interview, but I walked into the interview with a vision in mind and internalizing how I would imagine one day, if I were a product manager or if I were a senior person in that organization, how would I, what products would I develop or what
Mm-hmm.
vision would I share? And oftentimes I find that I'm sharing things that are very much appreciated with the interviewers because it shows that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. And you are
Um,
proactive.
yeah, the practice that you've thought about it, I think it's important. But and these can be very technical interviews, but just
Mm-hmm.
bringing a vision to the table.
Mm-hmm.
We can always figure out how to do the technical part. The
Mm-hmm.
vision and the creative is extremely important, and I think that is something that people all over the world look upon America as being very much a leader in, and that is that creative, innovative spirit, as well as being able to deliver the more technical and complicated
Mm-hmm.
side of things. But I think it's a balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you said, reverse engineering. Like first, you want to have a vision, you want to know what you are trying to achieve,
That's right.
and then worry. Even if you don't have the skills, you don't have the experience, try to find the people who do, and who can help you to get where you are heading.
That's right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you've mentioned, you said something really interesting there, about the structure of organizations, and with your focus on AI, do you see any difference right now, like the ways corporations and larger organizations function?
Yeah, clearly, there's going to be differences, but from, let's say, government, for
Mm-hmm.
example, it tends to be more structured, and there's reasons for that. There's lines of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
There is a tendency that there is a certain way for, there's a certain process of where ideas have to come from,
Mm-hmm.
and at times it can be frustrating because in the world that I come from before, after the military, but prior to my government services, ideas in commercial can come from anywhere. It can come from
Mm-hmm.
the bottom or it can come from the top, and they're encouraged because innovation is so important.
Mm-hmm.
In the more government structured environments, I think you tend to have the ideas have to come more from the top. I'll bet that's changing. I think that becomes a challenge, and in
Mm-hmm.
Japan, that's also, I think, sometimes a challenge as well, especially in the much larger organizations where it's kind of like a top-down approach as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
a bottom-up approach. But I think technology, the way that it's evolving, has democratized, if you will, where ideas can come from, where you can have someone working in a contact center,
Mm-hmm.
uh, developing, in the front lines with customers and leveraging artificial intelligence, but also experiencing firsthand opportunities to improve customer workflows, or improve the digital experience platform. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to have an integrated community, an integrated organization where, as we move to more remote work and more digital work, that we don't lose our channels of communication with our employees and our
Mm-hmm.
customers to derive those signals that help us improve how we deliver customer service or even the quality of our products.
Mm-hmm. I guess utilizing AI to experiment more at scale, and that in turn can put you in a spotlight in an organization, so you can bring more value faster. Don't you think it's
You can. I mean, and I think we see that happening today. Just look at LinkedIn and how many the posts that I read, people are
Mm-hmm.
talking about, or
Mm-hmm.
bragging
Mm-hmm.
about the kind of changes that are happening in their workplace. The
Mm-hmm.
difference is that in the commercial, the main objective might be to increase efficiency and reduce costs and enhance customer experience through AI,
Yes.
ultimately to achieve that competitive advantage. But
Mm-hmm.
in government, um, looking at kind of like how they're leveraging AI, there
Mm-hmm.
seems to be more of a tendency to focus on using AI to to use an AI for transparency, because there's such a strong demand for transparency in government operations,
Mm-hmm.
as they're accountable for to the public. And
Mm-hmm.
if an AI system makes the wrong prediction or recommendation, it could have
Mm-hmm.
broad implications for
Yes.
society. Hence, there's a push for explaining AI more in
How it
government,
works.
where
Mm-hmm.
that's also we're seeing that as well in the commercial space. While transparency, is still important in the commercial space,
Mm-hmm.
enterprises might prioritize, proprietary algorithms,
Mm-hmm.
or methods that give them a competitive advantage. However,
Yes.
as you get increased regulations, businesses are also focusing on explainable AI.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that from example, uh, X, formerly Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
releasing publicly their algorithms,
Mm-hmm.
so they can be publicly scrutinized and improved on. And whether you agree or disagree, these are trends that we're seeing more of. And but I haven't seen that on LinkedIn yet, and that would
Mm-hmm.
be an interesting topic matter maybe for the future to explore more.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, what are the algorithms, for example, that are being leveraged in a platform like LinkedIn, and what is
Yeah.
their responsibility um, to us as the consumers? But
Mm-hmm.
I think these are different ways that AI is being leveraged by people that are in the front lines, both in the commercial and public sectors.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in the government, the transparency is very crucial, but then should all treat it as an assistive tool, not something which makes decisions for humans, but something which can help us to grasp, to bring all the information which we need to know. Otherwise, we would not have time to find in various systems, and just help us to focus on the right thing.
There is definitely some concerns with
Mhm.
automation and how AI can ultimately be used, or where AI could be bad. But
Mhm.
I think that I see more good coming out of it than bad. I'll give
Mm-hmm.
you an example. For example, at the Department of Veteran Affairs, one of the most important responsibilities that the department has is adjudicating and making decisions
Mm-hmm.
that benefit veterans. And in the past, the process of making those decisions have been encumbered by the number of systems on top of systems on top of systems, and the disconnected workflows and the lack of appreciation for the digital experience that consumers have. And although this also exists in the commercial sector,
Mm-hmm.
the government has a fiduciary responsibility to its citizens to deliver those services, public services, as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so, leveraging AI to help make decisions that could improve that efficiency. Can I make decisions faster?
Mm-hmm.
Can I lead to more benefits that were not being delivered in the past? These would be considered very good things. And other challenge is that there are many jobs that go unfilled because there are so many mundane roles. I
True.
mean, there are roles that really should be we should be looking at technology and machine learning to automate the low skill, kind of mind numbing
you
process that
you
might need.
made it sound so
Yeah.
bad, but yes.
There are definitely some very, I witnessed at some of these very large call centers where decisions
Mm-hmm.
are made on behalf of veterans. And
Mm-hmm.
why would I not leverage technology that would shrink the backlog of
Yes.
decisions that need to be made. Oftentimes, this is a key frustration to veterans is having to wait so long for a decision to be made. Well, if I
Mm-hmm.
can improve that and cut it by 90% or even 50%, and the decisions are more favorable than they
Mm-hmm.
were the manual way, then I would say then that's a tremendous value add to the
Mm-hmm.
taxpayer and to the veteran that's relying on that government employee to make that decision. And
Mm-hmm.
so I see more positives than negatives, but I also do take very seriously the concerns that are out there. And it's not perfect, but again, it's that concept of building a plane while in flight. We can
Mm-hmm.
admire the problem, but the longer we wait, at some point, you also have the responsibility of making decisions,
Yes.
informed decisions, and I believe that is what it's important here is to make those informed decisions, but to lead with that in mind that you're trying to improve services to our taxpayers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the benefits can be on many different layers. Like you said, it gives the person the right answer, but then also there are many situations where solution or the answer has been already done or given same situation to somebody else. So it can just be reused. Right now, we don't experience that.
I think again, it depends on the use case, and I do see examples of where we are learning from those experiences and
Mm-hmm,
developing, more sophisticated, better models,
mm-hmm,
decision making capabilities, and I think there is more that can be done. Of course,
mm-hmm.
we're still early
Yes.
in this journey, but once we'll eventually, I think, reach a point where we'll be having less conversations about the concerns and more, hopefully, conversations about what other problems can we be solving
Mm-hmm.
with the technologies that are available to us today. But we have to practice good cybersecurity awareness at the same time, because with all this great technology, there are also new opportunities um, to take advantage of other
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses that we have. As I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is an area of great concern and vast opportunities as an investor to explore how AI in cybersecurity can help improve and mitigate the concerns that we're seeing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
just yesterday, I read about Sony has been hacked in Japan.
Hmm.
Um, and this is a pretty sophisticated organization, but yet we're seeing examples. Japan possibly could be one of the most ransomware countries in the world right now because it's
Crazy.
going through that inflection point of
Mm-hmm.
becoming more digital and taking
Mm-hmm.
advantage of all these tools. But
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have the cybersecurity awareness, or you're not using your tools effectively or at all,
Mm-hmm.
or you're not building that infrastructure of awareness and workforce, then this will become more the norm than the exception, unfortunately. And more could be done and needs to be done globally. But particularly right now, Japan is experiencing some very concerning trends.
Mm-hmm. So they are trying to catch up. They are trying to build this plane, but they forgot to build the most important bits
Yeah, I mean,
first.
there is, there are a lot of things there that I
Mm.
could point to, but I think, again, it's worth repeating. I think it begins with training and reskilling the workforce
Mhm. Mhm, mhm.
with the tools, with the latest tools, with the latest technology to help them strengthen their national security threats when it refers to cyber attacks. And we still see that here in the U.S., but it's alarming the level that I'm seeing and that Japan is experiencing right now. And the threat isn't going away; it's getting worse.
Yeah, it's more intensified, especially when you consider how many applications there are around deepfakes and synthetic voice and
Oh well, yeah. I mean,
so.
I have a long list of things that nation state actors, ransomware,
Yes.
even the supply chain attacks.
Oh yeah.
The supply chain is a huge problem. Who is your supply chain, supply chain, supply chain, and
Mhm.
how much vetting have you done? And this is a national security concern that
Mhm. Mhm.
I had to deal with and face firsthand, wearing the hat of the chief information security officer in the White House.
Mhm.
Um, Critical infrastructure. I have a friend who I worked with in the White House. He was the director of cybersecurity for the National Security Council, and he's recently started his own startup and working on critical infrastructure and the essential services, and looking at the problems there that concerns nations and concerns states
Mhm.
that have significant real world consequences.
Mhm. So what would you say are the biggest trends right now companies and governments should focus on when thinking about cybersecurity?
Well, during my time at the White House, one of the things that I was very much in favor of was the job descriptions that were being used to hire people needed to be
Mhm.
modernized. I think there's a tendency to overcomplicate the
Mhm.
job titles and the requirements, and I think the epiphany that many of us had was the realization that many of these roles, critical roles that needed to be filled in government,
Mhm.
were going to remain vacant if we didn't kind of think and reimagine uh, what these traditional job descriptions, how were we going to attract the next generation of cybersecurity experts. And I think so. We started with looking at the job descriptions and rewriting those to be more in line with what industry was looking at, not just government. I think the other idea was again, I've touched on this before, and that is reskilling. And
Mm-hmm.
that is using your existing workforce who already understands your business model, that already understands your use cases, that already understands your customers, that you don't necessarily need to hire from outside. There's a lot of talent within, and it just requires investing in the right tools and the right mindset, a growth mindset,
Mm-hmm.
to give permission, if you will, to your workforce that new opportunities. It's okay to come. That it requires reskilling,
Mm-hmm.
but that the skills that you've learned in the past could actually help, not hinder your new kind of experiences or entering in the cybersecurity workforce. That your background is actually an opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
enhance the awareness, but also to mitigate the threats that we're facing. So I think my advice would be double down on your investment in education and workforce reskilling, because that will pay dividends, both internally and externally, um, in the workforce. And we started to see the benefit of that in the government as we started taking that same approach, relying on our large workforce to help us fill those vacant jobs.
Also, I know that you are working around Web3 and Metaverse. Do you see any interesting trends there? Or any? I know there are lots of them again, but is there something which you particularly looking to maybe for as an investment opportunity?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of opportunities there as Web3 promotes the idea of decentralized ownership and control,
Mm-hmm.
and so the idea that users in the future or now might have more ownership over their data in digital assets and online identities, presents an opportunity. I'm very interested in the virtual economies like digital real estate, goods, and services that might become more significant economic drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And the decentralized kind of sandbox is already allowing us, as a buyer developer, to sell virtual land using cryptocurrency.
You mean like virtual land, like the Second Life or like Ready Player One, or it's
Sure.
just it's
I mean,
like real land
in real land.
being real land being maybe registered as a on blockchain. Like how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can give you examples in telemedicine, for example, how
Mm-hmm.
blockchain can help with pricing transparency,
Mm-hmm.
or in the pharmaceutical space. But I like use cases like that have a real impact in the real world. But it's not unfamiliar, I'm sure, to many in your audience that the virtual lands and virtual worlds like Zynga, for example, and Farmville,
Mm-hmm.
where back many years ago when I was at a particular financial institution, we experimented and explored use cases where planting a particular tree would monetize the value of your virtual land,
Mm-hmm.
in exchange for signing up for a particular product or currency. In this case, it was a prepaid card, and so we were bringing the nexus of real world and virtual world and digital marketing and digital currency. Although in this case, the currency was increasing the value of your Farmville land by planting this particular tree that was designed for us, that looked really nice. But yeah, I mean, the digital disparity, digital divide that we've seen on the internet, you know, in the metaverse or Web3, you can't escape it. It's just going to grow um, more prevalent, and I look forward to discovering uh, opportunities, if you will, especially in
Mm,
Japan, of how they are going to take these technologies to explore um, new startups.
mm. I guess it makes me a boomer because I haven't. I'm not that old. I'm 35, but I remember playing the Sims and building the words and World of Warcraft, where you had this concept, right? Like you could buy weapons for real money, but virtually. And I guess it's very much the same concept. And I know that big brands like Gucci and other retailers are investing and building virtual shops on the virtual lands, but somehow I don't know, it just doesn't, it's not so attractive as an idea. I prefer the reality.
Well, there's definitely more, I think, out there to explore. I'm
Mhm.
very encouraged by some of the startups that I've invested in. One of them, in particular, XMIR out of Japan, is focused on solving the challenges with dementia.
Mm.
And this founder, in particularly, impressed me with how he's using virtual reality, but without
Mhm.
having to wear the glasses to help
Right.
encourage the patients that are suffering with dementia to
Mhm.
stimulate their minds through the
Mm.
use of virtual reality and his unique technology. And so, use cases like that really impress me,
Yes.
and I'm very excited to see where um, XMIR goes with that, as
Mhm.
they've identified many opportunities to use their technology in the corporate space, as Japan is also looking to encourage their workforce to do more exercising. And so
Mhm.
he started with this one problem, which was driven out of his own personal experience with his family, and watching his parents go through um, these challenges and mental health challenges, and leveraging this technology to solve those problems. And now he's looking at that same technology to potentially help encourage the workforce to exercise more. And what's particularly interesting on how they're doing this is they're incentivizing their workforce that by downloading these apps and going through the exercise routine, that
Mhm.
by taking these steps, they potentially are lowering their own cost of healthcare. And so
Mhm.
it's a whole new way of kind of looking at things and leveraging this technology. And I'm really excited to see where this goes, and bringing such innovations here uh,
Mhm.
to America and beyond.
No, I get such innovations. I understand the application and I see the why it's so convincing, why it's so beneficial. The augmented reality, and but the investment in the virtual worlds, yeah, that's maybe not my thing. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I hear you. I think it's important just to kind of keep up with the trends.
Yes,
What may
you're
seem
right.
different,
You have to be
things that
open.
come in today may be actually an innovative new piece of technology that could solve, that have some more real world applications.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and I mean, it's definitely not the 80s or 90s when I was growing up. And for me, uh, it was fascinated with cell phones and beepers, and that was then, and here we are now, and you don't see that anymore.
Yes, on, on that, my last question, because I know that we have, like, you have to go, I have to go. Um, do you have any favorite memories pre-mobile, pre-internet? Because it feels like you are immersed in technology. Do you remember how it was before?
Do I remember? I'm
No,
trying to
I
remember.
remember. I was I think 14 when had a connection to the internet. You know, this dial-in, it was making sound like ee. I don't know if you had it maybe in
You
US. It was.
remember those days? Yes, lots of memories. I was very curious at a young age, and I would spend a tremendous amount of time at the library reading
Mm.
science books and encyclopedias and anything that just caught my attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my fascination at a very early age was learning how to create my own BBS board with a 2400 baud modem. So I'm very, very familiar with that sound, and kind of like imagine, if you will, the early onset of a LinkedIn back then,
Mm-hmm.
where you would join these BBS boards, and it was different. I had
Uh-huh.
I remember my monitor would occupy my entire desk. I was using Lotus 1, 2, and 3. So those memories, although they were very fun,
Mm-hmm.
I much prefer kind of like the technologies that we have today, because
Oh yeah.
you can do so much more quicker, and the
Mm-hmm.
barriers
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
entry and the learning curve is much faster, I believe.
True.
Um,
True. True.
but I started just basically by taking things apart and learning how to
Mm-hmm.
put them back together, like just computers.
Mm-hmm.
Even though um, today those opportunities don't exist as often, I can't open up my MacBook and put it
You
back together.
can.
Right,
You
with
can
Roy,
if you
Roy
force it.
I do miss those days, but
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciate the rapidness of technology and how interconnected we are. We wouldn't be able to have this interaction today
Mm-hmm.
that we're having right
Yeah.
now with you or your audience, if it wasn't for the advancements that we've made in technology and in internet.
Mm-hmm.
So that there are pros and cons, and
Yes. But I hope you agree that, in person is always best.
it is always best.
It's always best.
But
But sometimes it's not so efficient and environmentally friendly.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Um, but look, I hope that one day you and your audience and others have an opportunity to visit Japan. I highly
Oh,
recommend
I
it.
go. I've been
Yeah,
this year 1.5 months already. So yeah.
very nice.
Yes, I'm learning Japanese as well. Oops.
That's right.
Do you
Watashi
speak?
wa Nihongo skoshi.
Well done.
I'll add this last thought that for many years I have struggled. It's
Mm-hmm.
usually because it's about prioritization of my
Mm-hmm.
time. But I've
Mm-hmm.
always been fascinated with learning Japanese, and trying to build and find time to practice
Yes.
my just something as simple as my kanji
Mm-hmm.
uh, is always a challenge. But I found that in this recent trip,
Mm-hmm.
that I relied more on AI to help me overcome those challenges. And
So you
I,
became
I,
lazy.
I'll tell you that I gave a presentation in
Mm-hmm.
Japanese
Mm-hmm.
to a company that was focused on AI.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I used AI
Uh-huh.
to help me present in Japanese."
How,
And
but how did you do it? Like, did you record yourself and then translate it, and did you use synthetic voice, or it was just you learned how to read it?
I did both.
Uh-huh.
I first translated the presentation,
Uh-huh.
which was text based, and I
Mm-hmm.
used multiple tools just to make sure that I had it right. So I would
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
use one tool and then use another tool to
Compare.
verify that
Mm-hmm.
it actually
Yes.
this trying. It actually said what I wanted to say,
Uh-huh.
but it goes back to building those math equations. It really forces you and focuses you to use minimal language to get
Mm-hmm.
strong points across.
Sure.
But again, this is another beautiful thing about the technology we have today. And so, with that in mind, for those Japanese entrepreneurs, I also have, because I was able to do that, I have an expectation that they can also use the same technology to overcome, language barriers and
Mm-hmm.
challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mindful to anticipate the need. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
presenting to an audience that's a foreign audience, that you should be able to at least anticipate the need and attempt to translate in the the language of the country that you're pitching or presenting to.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost to me unexcusable that you wouldn't at least attempt to do that, or at least
Yes.
show the curiosity
Yes.
or almost a respect, to be able to not only speak in your native tongue, but also be able to translate that. And I think it goes to build that relationship, which is so
Mm-hmm.
important in Japan, and
Yeah,
also
it builds
important here.
trust. And it's you always connect better. Even I guess you see this as well when you travel and you try to speak, say a few words in the local language. It's always better received. You always get yeah, better treatment.
Absolutely. The disadvantage, though, is that I'm not practicing my Japanese as much because I'm relying on these tools to get my thoughts my thoughts across.
Okay.
Um,
I have an idea for you. So I'm on Duolingo. So let's become friends, and I will be I will
got it.
be
You got
cheering
it.
on you. But Duolingo is great for learning like words, but it doesn't really help you to speak. And what I found is another you can Google it, another application called Michel Thomas, and you don't
Okay.
write anything. You just listen. It's like the teacher who is saying something and you have to repeat it, and then another student who is with the teacher is repeating, and it works surprisingly well. Whenever I go to Japan, I always refresh what I have to know, and I remember lots of things right after. But for now, let's do Duolingo. I
Absolutely.
will
Right.
find you. You are difficult to find on LinkedIn. Like what I saw, that the aggregated data, it's not so easily like you cannot link it on
Yes,
another profile.
I'm trying to
You did
hide.
it on purpose, I think. I know.
No, I think it's just the spelling of the word data. I spelt it uniquely Japanese.
Ah, that's
Sometimes
the
the
okay.
E gets confused for the A, but
Right,
um,
right. Ah, smart. All your work and experience around crypto
that's
um
right. Well,
didn't go waste.
it's been a pleasure and an
Likewise.
honor, and I hope your audience finds this informative. And I hope to
And
do
if
this
they
again.
look for you, I will send them the direct link or
Please
email.
do. Please do. I
Okay,
look forward
perfect.
to it.
So enjoy your day. I think you still have a sun there. It's
Thank
dark
you.
here in Europe. But yeah, I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you, and I guess see you soon.
You got it.
See ya. Thanks. Bye.